My name is Jordan Creed, and for 6 years I toiled within the gilded cage of Westbridge and Holt, the boutique consulting firm forged by my wife's father, Derek Holt. Most believed I had it made, married to the boss's daughter, an undeniable part of the inner circle. They saw me at lavish company dinners, always seated prominently, Amira by my side, while Derek bestowed upon me that self-satisfied grin, the one that proclaimed me among his chosen few. By the way, please like and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. But what they wouldn't see were the 12 rejections, 12 times I'd applied for a promotion I'd earned twice over. 12 times I'd endured the ritual of sitting across from Derek in his glass-walled office, watching him fold his hands like a benevolent god, delivering the same dismissive line in a dozen veiled variations. "You're close, Jordan. Let's revisit this next quarter. I just need you to prove yourself a little longer." Each utterance punctuated by that polished, toothless smile that never quite reached his eyes. And each time I'd swallow the bitter pill of my pride, nodding like the loyal son-in-law everyone expected me to be. That day, it was a Thursday, late summer. The sun, a brazen accomplice, poured through the blinds, casting stark lines across the polished floor. The air hung heavy with the scent of old leather from the chair he'd personally selected, mingling with a faint accusing trace of polish and his aftershave. He slid the folder across his desk, a motion so practiced it felt meticulously rehearsed. I knew the map of his hands, the prominent veins, the glint of gold cufflinks under the unforgiving fluorescent light. I'd been here before, each time clinging to a fragile hope that this occasion would defy the pattern, that he would finally see me. But then he spoke, that measured tone, the one he reserved for moments when he played both mentor and gatekeeper. "You're close, Jordan," he began. "I just need to see a bit more initiative, a bit more leadership. Let's revisit this next quarter." The words scraped against my ears, a broken record skipping on a well-worn groove. A laugh, sharp and involuntary, clawed its way from my chest. Not a laugh of joy or relief or even disbelief, but the desolate, bitter laugh of a man who had finally, unequivocally, stopped caring. I let it escape, a short, sharp bark that caused Derek's eyes to narrow, his practiced smile freezing on his face. "Something funny?" he asked, his voice edged with ice. I leaned back, the leather chair groaning beneath my shift, and let the silence stretch just long enough to shatter the illusion. "No," I finally said, my voice steady. "Nothing funny at all." I stood, leaving the unopened folder resting on the edge of his desk, an unspoken challenge. "Thanks for your time, Derek." His brows drew together, that faint concern creeping into his voice. "Jordan, this isn't personal," he droned as if rehearsing a tired script. "Your family. I'm only looking out for what's best for the company." Family. The word landed like a physical blow. He had wielded it as a shield for every slight, every rejection, every time he'd pulled the rug from beneath my feet and expected gratitude. The rage flickered, then died, replaced by something far colder, more resolute. Family. That was the line. That was the game. And I was done playing. I walked out of that office, down the hallowed hallway, past the gleaming awards and the smiling portraits of Derek, arm in arm with senators and CEOs, past the receptionist whose pitying smile felt like a fresh wound. Perhaps my heart had been broken. Perhaps that was the true revelation. Because in that moment, in that final defiant laugh, I knew I was done being the loyal son-in-law. I reached my desk, the same one I'd been relegated to for 6 years, next to the supply closet and the perpetually ailing coffee machine. I sank into the chair, staring at the blinking cursor on my screen. The weight of every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every idea I'd shared only to see it claimed by another, pressed down on me. I thought of Amira, how she'd always shrugged off my frustrations with that same dismissive smile her father used. "He's just looking out for the company, Jordan," she'd say, sipping her wine, scrolling through her phone, as if my ambition was a minor inconvenience to be brushed aside. Every maybe next quarter, every almost, every promise that had dissolved into dust. A grim smile twisted my lips, not of humor, but of the quiet, steel-hard resolve of a man who had finally stopped waiting. I stood again, blood thrumming in my ears, and took one last look around the office. The interns huddled in a corner, sharing a private joke that would soon migrate to Slack. The senior partners huddled in Derek's office, strategizing their next grand conquest. And myself, reflected in the glass, a man in a suit that no longer quite fit, a tie too tight, eyes too weary from nights spent chasing an approval that would never materialize. I reached for my bag, packing it slowly, methodically, as if each item I tucked away was a piece of my old life, sealed off forever. Because in that moment, I wasn't just Jordan Creed, the man behind the desk at Westbridge and Holt. I was something else, something sharper, clearer, undeniably more dangerous. I was the man who had finally stopped caring, and that, I realized, made me free. I went home that night to Amira, my wife of 5 years, expecting at least a flicker of concern in her eyes, a hint of sympathy that would tell me she still saw me, not just a name on a paycheck or a placeholder in the Holt dynasty. The apartment hummed with the scent of her favorite jasmine candles, always burning in the living room. She was there, already on the couch, a glass of red wine in one hand, her phone in the other, scrolling mindlessly through a parade of influencers and overpriced handbags. The television murmured some forgettable reality show, casting soft blue shadows across her face. I dropped my bag by the door, the sound too loud in the sudden vast silence between us. She barely glanced up. "Hey," she said, her tone light, dismissive, as if I'd simply returned from a long day of errands, not another soul-crushing encounter with her father. I moved toward her, hoping she'd sense the tension in my shoulders, the clench of my jaw, but she only sipped her wine, tilting her head. "You okay?" she asked, a reflex devoid of genuine inquiry. I let out a slow breath, forcing down the anger that had simmered all the way home. "Derek passed me over again," I said, my voice low but steady. I watched her eyes flick from the television to me, saw the way she blinked once, twice, as if calculating her next move. "He said, maybe next quarter," I added, the bitterness seeping through. "That's 12 times now, Amira." She sighed, setting her glass down on the coffee table with a soft clink. "Jordan," she began, her tone laced with that familiar, gentle condescension, the same tone Derek used. "My dad knows what he's doing," she continued, brushing an invisible speck of lint from her yoga pants. "He's built that firm from the ground up. Maybe you just need to show him you're ready." The words struck me like a physical blow. "Show him I'm ready," I repeated, my voice cracking with disbelief. "Amira, I've given that place everything. Every late night, every weekend, every ounce of me. And he just keeps moving the finish line. Doesn't that bother you?" She reached for her glass again, her eyes already flickering back to her phone screen, fingers twitching, eager to check notifications. "He's testing you," she said with a shrug. "That's how he measures loyalty." "Loyalty?" My voice suddenly sharp, cut through the quiet. "Is that what you call it?" Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like he's making sure I never outrun his shadow. She didn't answer immediately, just sat there, legs crossed, one foot bouncing with that impatient rhythm that always signaled the end of her interest. "Look, Jordan," she said finally, setting the glass down a little harder this time. "You married into this family. You knew what you were signing up for." My chest tightened, the words sinking in like stones. "I knew I was signing up for a partnership," I said quietly. "Not a lifetime audition for a role I'll never get." Her eyes met mine then, and for a fleeting second I saw something flicker there. Doubt, perhaps, or even regret. But it vanished as quickly as it came. She reached for her phone again, thumb scrolling, eyes drifting away. "I'm sure he has his reasons," she said, her voice casual, almost bored. "He always does." I stared at her, the room suddenly too quiet, the flickering television screen like a cheap stage light on a performance I'd never agreed to. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. "You knew he'd pass me over again, and you said nothing." She didn't even flinch, just shrugged and took another sip of wine. "Jordan, it's not my place to get involved in his decisions. It's business. You know how he is." Business. The word hung in the air between us like a curse. I stood, my legs suddenly unsteady, and turned away from her, staring at the row of family photos on the bookshelf. Pictures of us at parties, at company events, at dinner with Derek and his wife. All smiles, all pretending we were one big happy family. But I knew now that I'd been the only one pretending. I thought about every conversation with Derek where he'd praised me just enough to keep me tethered. Every time he'd used me as a pawn in his elaborate game. And I thought about how she'd let him. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I grabbed a pillow from the couch, the one that still held the faint scent of her shampoo, and lay down in the living room, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly, like the days of my life being devoured by a machine I couldn't stop. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. Because the thing I'd been afraid to admit, the truth I'd refused to see, had finally sharpened into agonizing focus. This wasn't just about a promotion. It wasn't just about Derek or Westbridge and Holt. It was about the person I trusted most in the world, the person who had promised to stand beside me, choosing silence instead of loyalty, choosing him instead of me. By morning, the jasmine scent had faded, replaced by the cold, acrid smell of betrayal that clung to the walls like smoke. I sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the decision that had already been made within me. This was the line in the sand, the moment I stopped waiting for validation and started writing my own story. As the sun broke through the blinds, washing the living room in pale gold light, something inside me shifted. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. I would never be the same man again, and I didn't want to be. Because the one thing that was suddenly, beautifully, painfully clear was that the betrayal wasn't merely professional, it was deeply personal. And that meant the game had changed forever. I didn't rage. I didn't quit. I did something far more dangerous. I started documenting. Every system I had created, every process I had refined, every spreadsheet I had meticulously built. When Derek's so-called visionary hires inevitably failed to deliver, I quietly documented. I had always been meticulous by nature, the kind of person who saved every version, who left a trail of breadcrumbs so no detail was ever truly lost. But now every click of the save button felt different, intentional, like a soldier fortifying a stronghold no one else could see. I wasn't doing it for them anymore. I was doing it for me. It began subtly, a file labeled personal notes on my desktop. Inside, I mapped the intricate architecture of our biggest client deliverables, the way I'd streamlined Halberg's financial analytics module after their CTO inexplicably abandoned ShipMid project, the custom dashboards I'd built for Clearstone's logistics team when their internal developers botched the integration, all the hidden linchpins no one else possessed the patience or skill to mend. I cataloged every patch, every obscure code snippet, every ingenious workaround I devised to keep Derek's grand promises from unraveling. Each note felt like a step away from the loyal son-in-law they had molded me to be, and a definitive stride closer to the man I was becoming. I called it my indispensability map. Not because I wanted to stay, that ship had already sailed, but because I wanted an undeniable record of every brick I'd laid, every nail I'd driven, every long night I'd spent fixing what Derek and his hand-picked golden children couldn't. This wasn't about making myself too valuable to fire. That naive hope had long since perished. It was about truly understanding my worth and proving, at least to myself, that I had been the silent spine holding up this entire fragile house all along. During the day, I maintained the facade of the helpful team player. My smile remained sharp, my tone measured. I attended leadership huddles, offering calm, insightful input. I mentored the wide-eyed juniors, those bright-eyed kids who still believed every happy hour and every compliment from Derek was a promise, not a leash. I taught them how to patch the same broken systems I'd been patching for years, how to keep the gears grinding when the engine was already half dead. And at night, I transformed into something else entirely. Every late night from then on was a step away from Westbridge and Holt, and a deliberate step toward the life I truly desired. I started small. Registering the domain for Veritas Consulting Group felt like a guilty pleasure at first. A name, a logo, a shell company existing solely on my hard drive. But that digital placeholder was more than a mere idea. It was a potent declaration. I would not let them define my worth anymore. I would build something that didn't depend on Derek's fickle approval, something I could truly own, free from the burdensome strings of a family name I had grown so weary of carrying. I didn't skip a beat at work. That was the silent brilliance of my plan. Derek's inner circle still saw me as the loyal son-in-law, the reliable fixer, the dependable individual who always delivered the right answer. I played that role with Oscar-worthy precision. When the project manager inevitably fumbled the Clearstone timeline, I stayed late to fix it again. When Halberg's CIO bewilderedly asked why their analytics reports kept failing, I smiled and promised to look into it again. Every problem I solved, I added to my indispensability map. Every time I saved the day, I meticulously documented the exact step-by-step process I had used. I was building an instruction manual for my own escape, one carefully documented line at a time. It's ironic how effortlessly I maintain that polite smile while meticulously constructing my exit strategy. I had always possessed an innate ability to read a room, to know when to nod and when to remain silently observant. I had watched Derek for years, the way he played people, the way he spun half-truths into gold-plated lies. Somewhere along the way, I realized he had unwittingly been teaching me how to play the same game. Only now I wasn't playing for him. I was playing for myself. One night around 11, I was still at the office. The solitary glow from my monitor illuminated the desk like a miniature sun. I leaned back, surveying the darkened cubicles, the hush of abandoned coffee cups and towering paper stacks. A few scattered desks still displayed screens flickering with a ghostly blue light. I thought about all the times I'd stayed late patching up other people's mistakes. The times I'd walked past Derek's office and seen him packing up at 5, that smug grin plastered on his face. The times Amira had called, annoyed that I'd missed dinner again, and I'd apologized, promising to make it up to her. Promises I'd known even then were already broken. I turned back to my screen and opened the latest version of my indispensability map. I read through the lines of code I'd written, the frantic notes I'd scribbled in the margins of critical project plans, the subtle, brilliant tweaks I'd made to archaic legacy systems that only I truly understood. Mostly blue light. I thought about all the times I'd stayed late patching up other people's mistakes. The times I'd walked past Derek's office and seen him packing up at 5, that smug grin plastered on his face. The times Amira had called, annoyed that I'd missed dinner again, and I'd apologized, promising to make it up to her. Promises I'd known even then were already broken. I turned back to my screen and opened the latest version of my indispensability map. I read through the lines of code I'd written, the frantic notes I'd scribbled in the margins of critical project plans, the subtle, brilliant tweaks I'd made to archaic legacy systems that only I truly understood. I considered the underlying architecture of Westbridge and Holt itself, the thin scaffolding holding up a brand that had always been more illusion than substance. I realized in that moment that the only thing truly preventing the entire place from collapsing was me. And that profound realization settled over me like protective armor. I didn't hate Derek anymore. That was the ultimate irony. I didn't even hate Amira. They were simply who they were. The game had been rigged from the start, but I had learned to play it better than they ever could. I had learned to discern the hairline cracks in the foundation, the crucial places where their grandiose vision inevitably crumbled without my steady hand to hold it aloft. I closed my laptop and sat in the enveloping darkness, letting the soft hum of the servers fill the silence. I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready. Because I didn't rage, I didn't quit. I did something far more dangerous. I started documenting, and that was the day Jordan Creed stopped being the man behind the desk and began becoming the man behind the plan. 3 of our top clients, Halberg Systems, Clearstone Health, and Rovian MedTech, relied on me directly. Not on Derek, not on his so-called visionaries, on me. They weren't privy to all the internal politics at Westbridge and Holt, but they understood one undeniable truth. When something inevitably went wrong, when deadlines slipped, or insidious bugs threatened to derail launches, they called me. Not the project managers, not the high-priced consultants who parachuted in for glory and left the real gritty work to people like me. I was the one who rolled up his sleeves, who truly understood their intricate systems, who had personally guided them through crises and prevented them from losing face with their own demanding boards. I was the one who answered the phone at 2 in the morning when their CIOs couldn't sleep. I was the invisible glue that kept everything together. And I think deep down Derek knew it too, though he'd sooner swallow his tongue than admit it aloud. That unspoken knowledge was power. I began mapping it all, every client contact, every critical system dependency, every single point where my specialized experience simply couldn't be replicated by a glossy presentation or a smiling empty promise. I didn't do it to sabotage them. That wasn't my style. I did it because I needed to comprehend just how deeply the hooks went. I needed to understand where I ended and Westbridge began. And the more I mapped, the more the stark truth emerged. They hadn't promoted me because they couldn't afford to. I had become too profoundly important to lose. That was the damning secret they would never, ever articulate. They had inadvertently built a company too dependent on one man they refused to acknowledge. I started with Hallberg, I had single-handedly redesigned their entire logistics tracking system after their CTO inexplicably vanished. I rebuilt their analytical stack from the ground up and personally trained their staff on every new module. I was the silent reason their quarterly reports didn't melt down during every earnings call. I documented every nuanced process, how the data pipeline truly worked, how the integration with their archaic legacy systems would inevitably shatter if you deviated even slightly from my exact precise sequence. Then I moved to Clearstone. Their entire dashboard interface, from patient intake to billing, was my brainchild. Derek had grandly promised them a cutting-edge platform, but when the vendor software collapsed into a digital mess, it was me, working endless weekends and nights, who meticulously stitched it back together. I listed every critical patch, every custom script, every ingenious workaround that made it function seamlessly. Finally, Rovian. Their regulatory compliance tracker had been an unmitigated disaster. I had built a new one from scratch, anticipating every potential audit point, every workflow bottleneck. I made it so robust, so intuitive, that they could finally sleep at night, secure in the knowledge that their sensitive patient data wouldn't suddenly appear on the front page of the journal. As I meticulously documented, I began to see the undeniable patterns, the deep-seated dependencies that no one else had ever bothered to understand. Every time they had asked me to fix it, I had done so without question. But now I wasn't just fixing things, I was learning. I was building a comprehensive roadmap of the company's very backbone, and every single path on that map led back to me. I wasn't so arrogant as to believe I was truly irreplaceable, but I was smart enough to know they would bleed profoundly before they could ever hope to fill the gaping voids I would leave. And that, I realized, was a power I had never consciously understood I possessed. It changed how I walked the halls. When Derek's latest golden boy needed help prepping for a client demo, I was there, offering a polite smile and a few well-placed insights that made him look brilliant, but only because I chose to. When the partners huddled for strategy sessions, I sat at the periphery of the table, listening, absorbing every word, not because I craved inclusion, but because I needed to know precisely how much they relied on my unspoken knowledge. They had no idea I was quietly orchestrating my own departure. I didn't need to brag or posture. I possessed the receipts, the undeniable data, the hard evidence that the glue they'd taken for granted all these years was the only thing preventing the entire structure from collapsing. I had always been adept at blending in, at making myself seem like the ultimate team player, the reliable one who would always go the extra mile. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. I had transformed into the man who understood every lever, every choke point, every critical dependency that coursed through the very heart of the firm. I knew the intricate systems they couldn't navigate without me. I knew the client relationships they had neglected and the ones they had callously abused. I knew the passwords. I knew the codes. I knew the subtle, insidious ways one could make a system spectacularly misbehave if the wrong hand tried to run it. And I didn't need to lift a finger to make that happen. It would happen all by itself, because no one else had ever bothered to truly learn how to fix the messes they so casually created. Sometimes I would catch Derek's eye during one of our all-hands meetings, those saccharine pep rallies where he'd pontificate about synergy and vision as if they were magical incantations. He would offer me that practice CEO smile, the one that silently conveyed, "Good soldier," and I would smile back, knowing with a deep, quiet satisfaction that he had no inkling of what I had painstakingly constructed in the shadows. He genuinely believed he was the glue holding this sprawling place together, but he was utterly wrong. He was the face on the brochure, the booming voice on the conference calls, the the man who took all the credit. But he was not the glue. I was. In the evenings, I would walk the empty halls after the lights dimmed, looking at the rows of desolate cubicles and glass-walled offices. I would think about the countless people who had passed through here, the ones who had arrived bright-eyed and eager, only to leave burned out and irrevocably disillusioned. I would recall the times I'd painstakingly picked up the pieces of their shattered projects, the times I'd shielded vulnerable clients from the inevitable fallout of Derek's unchecked arrogance, and I would smile because I knew something he didn't. I had earned every single ounce of the respect those clients held for me. I knew I had built something truly real, something enduring, in a place that cared only about superficial appearances. The irony was not lost on me. Derek had spent years grandiosely declaiming about legacy, about building something that would last forever, but he had, in fact, built a flimsy house of cards held together by the quiet dedication of one man he adamantly refused to acknowledge, and that man was me. Every late night, every early morning, every crisis miraculously averted, every intractable problem painstakingly solved, I had been the glue, and I had been holding them all together. Now, finally, I was ready to let go, because the glue was mine to withhold. In secret, I officially registered Veritas Consulting Group. The name itself felt like a rebellion, a quiet, defiant act of ownership over my own future. I chose Veritas because it meant truth, and after years of smiling through Derek's elaborate half-truths and insidious manipulations, I craved for my next chapter to be built on something fundamentally real. It began small, a domain name, a logo sketched on a napkin in the hushed corner of a coffee shop, a blank website displaying a single defiant phrase, "Coming soon." But even that felt like a breath of oxygen. It was mine. It bore none of Derek's fingerprints, no ties to the Holt name, just me and the work I'd spent years perfecting. I didn't rush. That was the crucial element. I knew if I moved too fast, Derek would inevitably catch on. He had his people, his intricate ways of ensuring no one strayed too far from the corporate plantation. So I took my time. I'd slip out during lunch for quiet coffees with old colleagues, people I had personally trained or mentored who had since moved on to other firms or bravely embarked on their own entrepreneurial journeys. We'd meet at out-of-the-way places, cafes with chipped formica tables or dimly lit wine bars that never attracted the afterwork crowd from Westbridge. I'd casually ask them about their projects, their latest frustrations. I'd listen far more than I spoke, simply checking in, I'd say with a casual smile, as if merely catching up for old time's sake. But every word I uttered was meticulously calculated, every question designed to plant a subtle seed, a potent reminder that I was still out there, still building something, still someone who could help them if things ever spiraled out of control. Where they were. I made no overt promises, no aggressive poaching, no direct sales pitch. Just subtle, potent hints that I profoundly understood their pain points, that I knew intimately what it was like to be trapped in a place that viewed you as utterly expendable. And I let them connect the dots themselves, let them recall the countless times I'd personally bailed them out, the times I'd provided them with solutions no one else at Westbridge possessed the patience or the insight to find. I was planting seeds, not violently pulling up roots, and it was working. Meanwhile, at the office, I maintained my meticulously crafted mask. I still arrived early, still stayed late, still fixed the problems no one else could touch. Derek had no idea. His self-absorbed golden hires were far too busy chasing his fleeting approval to notice that I was quietly building a formidable, loyal army. People who no longer even worked at Westbridge, but who remembered me when their backs were truly against the wall. People who, when the opportune time finally came, would pick up the phone and call me first. I could sense it in the way they responded to my messages, a warmth that had nothing whatsoever to do with company logos or generic holiday cards. It was respect, the kind that couldn't be faked or bought. And I knew that was my real insurance policy, far more potent than any ironclad non-compete clause or a hollow golden handshake from Derek. No, my insurance was the genuine relationships I'd painstakingly built, the unwavering reputation I'd earned by consistently showing up when it truly mattered most. At home, I maintained the intricate performance as well. Amira would inquire about my day, and I'd provide just enough detail to keep the flimsy illusion alive. Just the usual, I'd say, smiling as I rinsed dishes or folded laundry. Another crisis averted. She would nod, sip her wine, and scroll through her phone, never asking too many questions. I wondered if she even cared anymore, or if she had always been more invested in the idea of me as Derek's loyal soldier than in the actual man himself. Either way, I was past caring. I wasn't doing this for her approval. I was doing it for me. One night I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open, the cool glow of the screen illuminating my face with shades of quiet determination. I stared at the logo I had meticulously designed for Veritas Consulting Group, clean, confident lines that spoke of integrity, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not in the sense of ego or arrogance, but in the profound, quiet certainty that I was finally building something entirely on my own terms, something no one could ever take away from me. I thought about all the times Derek had told me I wasn't quite ready, all the times he'd smiled that patronizing smile and handed the promotion to someone else, and I realized with a startling clarity that I had been ready all along. He had just been too terrified to admit it. I reached out to one of my old contacts at Clearstone Health, a brilliant woman named Tasha who had always treated me with genuine respect, who had trusted me with some of their most sensitive systems. "Just wondering how things are going," I wrote, keeping the message breezy, casual. She responded within minutes. "Rough, honestly," she wrote back. "Our dashboards keep failing. I miss having you around." I smiled as I read her message. Another seed planted, another subtle, potent reminder that I was still the man who could make her problems vanish. Every conversation was a stitch in the meticulously woven fabric of my future, a powerful thread connecting me to the life I was determined to build. And with every passing day, the old life at Westbridge and Holt felt less like a home and more like a stifling cage I had irrevocably outgrown. I still wore the suit, still took the meetings, still played the part. But inside, I was miles away. I was building something that couldn't be boxed in by Derek's petty games or Amira's chilling indifference. I was building freedom. It wasn't about revenge anymore. That had been my initial visceral instinct. But as the days bled into weeks, I realized revenge wasn't enough. I didn't just want to witness Westbridge crumble. I wanted to rise. I wanted to show myself and the world that I had been far more than a mere name on someone else's roster, that I was the architect of my own destiny, that I didn't need Derek's hollow approval or his last-minute maybe next quarter carrot. I had my own map now, my own meticulously crafted plan. And every quiet coffee, every subtle nod, every seed I planted was a decisive step closer to the moment I would walk away. Not with bitterness or vengeful anger, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who had built his own empire from the smoldering ashes of their neglect. I didn't need their permission. I had already given it to myself. And that, I realized, was the most powerful thing of all. Exactly 6 months after rejection number 12, I walked into Derek's office with a calm that felt profoundly earned. I had spent the entire night before rehearsing the conversation, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to savor every single word, every precious second of the meticulously planned exit I had been orchestrating for years. The office still smelled of expensive leather and raw ambition, his signature cologne still lingering in the air, a subtle, constant reminder that this opulent space had always been his undeniable domain, never truly mine. But on this day, the currents of power had shifted. Today, it was I who held the reins, I who dictated the final breath of the conversation. I had meticulously donned my finest attire, a tribute to an anniversary, a silent testament to the year Derek had first audaciously passed me over. It clung to me, a second skin, perfectly tailored, precisely as I had forged every intricate system that held their crumbling empire together. My shoes gleamed with a merciless polish, my tie straightened with a meticulous precision. I knew Derek's reverence for appearances. He drilled it into me, though never with explicit instruction. At Westbridge and Halt, appearances were everything until they weren't. He looked up, his gaze a fleeting dance of calculation and condescension, a performance perfected over years. Jordan, he purred, his voice a silken trap, leaning back like a monarch surveying his favored subject. Sit down. But I did not sit. Instead, I laid a stark white envelope upon the polished mahogany, a simple, unhesitant offering, devoid of apology, yet destined to shatter his meticulously crafted world. His smile faltered as he retrieved it, turning it over as if it might unleash a venomous bite. What's this? His tone, already sharper, his eyes narrowing, desperately scanning my face for any flicker of weakness. I held his gaze, unwavering, resolute. It's my resignation, I stated, my voice calm yet resonating with an undeniable finality. Effective 2 weeks from today, as per company policy. Each syllable was a lock turning, a rusted chain shattering, a declaration of liberation I had yearned for far too long. He stared at the envelope as if it harbored a coiled viper. You're quitting? His voice, now higher, laced with disbelief, betrayed his unraveling. In the middle of a product migration? The irony tasted like ash. The very migration I had salvaged time and again, the one his so-called top hires had repeatedly fumbled. A surge of defiant laughter threatened to erupt. I longed to remind him of every midnight summons, every desperate plea. Jordan, I need you to fix this. But I refrained. I owed him nothing more. I simply nodded. Yes, I affirmed. 2 weeks' notice, as per policy. I could almost see the frantic calculations behind his eyes, the surging panic, the disbelief, the dawning, horrific realization that their very foundation was about to crumble. We were just about to promote you, he stammered, words tumbling out, grasping at a fleeting lifeline. I was advocating hard for Q3. That was his favorite game, always the next quarter, always the phantom promise that never materialized. I had played along for far too long. That's the game, isn't it? I countered, the bitterness replaced by a stark, unyielding clarity. Always next quarter, always a carrot. I'm done chasing. His face contorted, a vein in his temple throbbing like a silent, desperate alarm. Don't do this, he pleaded, his tone suddenly softer, almost desperate. Your family, we've invested in you. Family, that wretched word. The chain he'd shackled around my neck for 6 agonizing years, the leash he'd yanked whenever he demanded my subservient smile. I leaned forward, planting my hands firmly on his desk, my voice low yet unyielding. "No," I declared. "I invested in you. Every late night, every system I fixed, every time I saved this firm from its own arrogance. I gave you everything, Derek. And every time you offered me the same tired line, 'Next quarter.'" I straightened, leaving the words hanging in the stifling air, a final chilling verdict. "This is my quarter now." He blinked, his mouth opening and closing, a desperate struggle for words that refused to come. I witnessed the naked panic in his eyes, the terror of what would transpire when I was no longer there to staunch the bleeding, to prevent the exodus of their precious clients. A flicker of satisfaction ignited within me, not vengeance but a righteous justice. He had spent years manipulating me, but in the end I had mastered the game better than he could ever fathom. "Jordan," he finally managed, his voice trembling, a raw note of desperation echoing in the opulent room. "We can work this out. Let's talk about a raise, a promotion, an executive title, whatever you want." A bitter laugh almost escaped me. I had craved those very things once, but no longer. Titles and raises were his pathetic currency, yet I had already amassed a fortune of my own. "No," I responded, my voice quiet but utterly resolute. "You can't buy what I'm leaving with." He wouldn't comprehend, and I harbored no expectation that he would. For what I carried with me was not mere knowledge or a network of contacts. It was the unwavering confidence of a man who had finally ceased to ask for permission. I turned and walked toward the door, my steps measured, my back unbowed. I felt his eyes on me, the crushing weight of the office I had poured my very soul into, the place that had once felt like the epicenter of my existence. But it was no longer my world. It was his, and I no longer belonged there. My hand found the cool metal of the doorknob. I paused, a fleeting second, to glance over my shoulder. He remained transfixed by the resignation letter as if it were a bomb he lacked the knowledge to disarm. 2 weeks, I stated, my voice cutting through the silence. Use them wisely. Then I opened the door and stepped into the sterile hallway, the overhead fluorescence a blinding, indifferent glare, but I didn't care. For the first time in 6 years, I felt light. I felt free. I felt like a man who had finally reclaimed his name, his life, his inherent worth. And with every step away from Derek's hollow office, I knew, with absolute certainty, there was no turning back. This was my farewell, my declaration of independence. No promotion, no raise, no desperate, hollow promise could ever change that. The collapse did not erupt with a fiery crescendo or a cacophony of shouting. It began with silence, a stillness that seeped into the very cracks of Westbridge and Halt like a malevolent ghost, a quiet no one truly noticed until it was far too late. It commenced with a simple email received on my phone while I sipped coffee in the break room from Clearstone's CIO. "Jordan," it read, "can we talk about the dashboard errors? Your team hasn't been responding." My team. How amusing they found that term, when I had always been a solitary force. I had single-handedly resurrected their analytics stack, spent countless hours perfecting their regulatory interface, and tirelessly trained their staff until they could practically recite my code verbatim. And now they were finally noticing the profound silence. I left the email unanswered, at least for a while. Let it fester, let it breathe. Let Derek and his hand-picked protégés squirm, wondering why the vital pipeline they had relied upon for years was no longer humming with its familiar, comforting rhythm. Then came the call from Halberg's CTO, a tremor of panic discernible in her voice. "Jordan, we've got errors in the logistics module. We need your insight. Can you jump on a call?" Again, I hesitated, not out of malice, for sabotage was never my intention. Instead, I paused because I needed them to grasp the undeniable truth they had so stubbornly refused to acknowledge. I was the one holding this crumbling edifice together, not Derek, not his gilded boys, me. Meanwhile, Derek himself was spiraling. He began arriving earlier, his shirts less crisp, his hair a touch disheveled. I would catch fleeting glimpses of him in the hallways, pacing, his eyes darting frantically, as if he expected a crisis to materialize from every shadow. He'd corner me in the break room, his smile stretched too thin, a desperate grimace. "Jordan, I know we got off on the wrong foot with that resignation," he'd begin, "but let's be reasonable. I can offer you a raise, an executive title, whatever you want." I would listen politely, sipping my coffee, but inwardly I had already departed. For my true clients, my real clients had already begun to reach out to me in secret. They no longer placed their faith in Westbridge and Halt. They placed their faith in me. Each time Derek extended an offer, I declined, politely, calmly. Every refusal felt like a relentless hammer blow to the very foundation he had constructed upon my labor. It was not rage, not anymore. It was a simple, inevitable truth. When the one who anchors your house departs, the walls begin to buckle. And that is precisely what transpired. The boardroom, once the stage for his chest-thumping declarations of vision and synergy, transformed into a desolate ghost town. Half the meetings were labeled urgent, yet none yielded genuine solutions. The partners scrambled, desperately attempting to fill the gaping void I had left, but they couldn't. For I had been more than a mere technician. I had been the architect, the one who understood where every piece fit, where every system interconnected, where every process could, and often did, falter if left in the wrong hands. It began subtly. Delayed updates, emails marked high priority that vanished into the ether, dashboards that crashed mid-client demo. Then the CIO at Halberg called Derek directly, demanding to know why Jordan hadn't responded to her latest request. I could only imagine the look on Derek's face when he realized he had no answer. I had offered him every chance to recognize my worth, every opportunity to treat me as a partner instead of a pawn. But he had never learned, and now the silence was teaching him what my words never could. He tried everything: a raise, a backdated promotion, an executive title. He even summoned me to his office one last time, his voice ragged with desperation, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. "Jordan," he pleaded, his hands clutching the edge of his desk as if it might otherwise float away. "We need you. I was wrong. I see that now. You're the glue. I'll give you anything. Just name it." I stood there, witnessing his complete unraveling, and for a fleeting moment a flicker of pity stirred within me. But it swiftly dissipated, for this was not merely about me. It was about every dismissive gesture, every stolen idea, every instance where he had weaponized my loyalty as a shield for his own abysmal incompetence. "I'm sorry, Derek," I stated, my voice calm yet unyielding. "I can't come back. I have other commitments now." His face crumpled like a man realizing his oxygen supply had been severed with no backup tank in sight. "Jordan, please," he whimpered, his voice cracking. "Think about the team. Think about the clients." I shook my head slowly. "I did," I replied. "For 6 years I thought about them every single night, and that's precisely why I'm leaving." "Because you never did." He leaned back, his shoulders slumping under the crushing weight of a truth he could no longer deny. I turned and walked out, the soft click of the door handle a final resonant chord in a song that had played far too long. In the hallway, I paused, allowing the profound quiet to settle around me. It was not the furious silence of a man walking away in a rage. It was the serene silence of a man who had finally reclaimed his name, his dignity, his power. Back at my desk, I checked my messages. 2 new client inquiries at Veritas, whispers through the grapevine that I was forging something superior, something authentic. A slow smile spread across my face. I hadn't pursued them. They had sought me out. Loyalty, unlike grand pronouncements, never lies, and that was a truth Derek would never, ever grasp. In the ensuing days, the collapse at Westbridge and Halt unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. I observed from a safe, detached distance. Emails piled up in the shared inbox, unanswered, ignored. Project managers flailed, desperately attempting to piece together systems they had never bothered to comprehend. Clients began to look elsewhere, first discreetly, then with open, defiant abandon. And through it all, I toiled at Veritas, constructing something that felt inherently honest, something that felt unequivocally mine. For collapse does not always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it arrives with silence, and sometimes that is the most deafening sound of all. On my final day at Westbridge and Halt, the boardroom resembled a funeral home draped in corporate regalia. The chairs were half occupied, the once pristine whiteboard streaked with the ghostly remnants of abandoned strategy sessions. A lingering coffee ring here, a faded Q4 target there. Even Derek, mister. Always in control, appeared to have aged a decade in a single week. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, his eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights filled with frantic calls. The golden boy hires who once smirked at me during presentations now stared at the floor, their faces pale as if the very air itself was poisonous. I entered carrying only a small box of my personal effects, a couple of framed certificates they had bestowed upon me in the naive days when I still believed their accolades held meaning, a handful of pins I had purchased with my own money, and a mug emblazoned with "World's Best Dad," a gift from my children years before I had ever stepped foot in this place. I didn't truly need the box, but I craved the ritual. I yearned to meet their eyes as I departed, to witness the devastating cost of their short-sighted decisions. Derek awaited me, standing at the head of the table like a man bracing for execution. His eyes flickered upwards as I approached, and for a fleeting second I imagined he might utter a "thank you." But then his polished mask slid back into place. "Jordan," he rasped, his voice scratchy as if he had been rehearsing this speech all night. "Let's talk." I placed the box gently on the edge of the table and folded my arms, waiting. He gestured to the empty seat opposite him, the very one I had occupied countless times while he explained with condescending patience why I was still not quite enough. But I did not sit. I stood, allowing him to perceive that this conversation was unfolding entirely on my terms. "Look," he began, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "I know things haven't always been perfect between us, but we're at a crossroads now. The clients are rattled, the team's morale is shot. You leaving right now? It's a gut punch, Jordan. I need you." I raised an eyebrow, the corners of my mouth twitching at the exquisite irony. "You need me?" I asked, savoring the words. "Funny how that never came up during those 12 promotions you passed me over for." He winced, and for the first time in years I saw a genuine crack in his impenetrable armor. "Look, I'm not perfect," he confessed, his voice raw. "I've made mistakes, but you've always been part of this family, Jordan. We can fix this." I'll double your salary, equity, whatever you want. Just stay." It was almost comical, the desperation etched in his eyes, the pathetic way he clung to the delusion that money and titles could somehow mend the gaping wound he had carved into this place. But he didn't grasp it. He would never grasp it. Because it had never been about the money. It had been about respect, about loyalty, about the fragile trust he had systematically eroded, one callous rejection at a time. I leaned in just enough so he could discern the unwavering resolve in my eyes. "You can't fix this with a check, Derek," I stated. "You taught me that when you passed me over for the last time, when you made it unequivocally clear I'd never be more than the son-in-law, the loyal soldier who would always be second to your self-proclaimed visionaries." His jaw clenched, his eyes darting toward the door as if he yearned to flee. But I pressed on, for I needed him to comprehend, to truly understand why this was happening. "I gave you everything," I declared, my voice low but unshakable. "I carried this place when your stars couldn't deliver. I built the systems that salvaged your deals, the dashboards that rescued your reputation, and every time you said next quarter, I waited. But I'm done waiting, Derek. I'm done being the glue you only notice when it's gone." Silence permeated the room like a thick, suffocating fog. The partners, Derek's sycophantic yes-men who had always smirked at my unwavering loyalty, couldn't meet my gaze. One of them cleared his throat as if he might actually speak, but then thought better of it. Derek made one final desperate attempt, his voice trembling. "Jordan, think about what you're throwing away. The relationships you've built, the trust you've earned. You walk out that door and it's over. We can't protect you out there." I exhaled slowly, a long, drawn-out sigh. "That's where you're wrong," I countered. "Because the relationships weren't with Westbridge and Halt, they were with me. I was the one they called at midnight. I was the one they trusted to deliver. You think you own them, but you don't. You never did." His face crumpled then, like a man realizing his entire empire was built on borrowed time. "Don't do this," he whispered, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. "Don't throw away what we've built." I picked up my box, feeling its familiar weight settle into my palm. "We didn't build it," I corrected him. "I did. And now I'm building something of my own." As I turned to leave, I felt their eyes on my back. Fear, disbelief, perhaps even a grudging flicker of respect. The elevator ride down felt profoundly different. Each floor I passed, a layer of dead skin I was finally shedding. By the time the doors opened to the bustling lobby, I felt lighter than I had in years. Outside, the city pulsed with vibrant life. Cars honking, people rushing, the afternoon sun striking the glass towers like a burgeoning promise. I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air fill my lungs, a fresh start inscribed in every exhale. I wasn't merely abandoning a job. I was reclaiming my dignity, my purpose, my entire future. For when the tables truly turn, it's not about winning or losing, it's about choosing, and I chose me. Veritas Consulting Group was not merely a name on a door, it was the culmination of everything I had learned from years of being overlooked, from every next quarter Derek had dangled before me, from every system I had painstakingly built that no one else could possibly manage. It was the living embodiment of all the lessons they had inadvertently taught me, that loyalty is a currency they had spent far too freely, that talent is a resource they had relentlessly abused without ever nurturing. At Veritas, I wasn't constructing an empire, I was building a sanctuary, a place where people were more than mere disposable cogs in a colossal, uncaring machine. We began small, just me in a modest one-room office with a second-hand desk and a whiteboard that had seen better days. But a fire burned within me that no windowless office could ever extinguish. I poured every ounce of my being into those nascent days, meticulously designing pitch decks, rewriting code for the very platforms I had once rescued under Derek's name, sketching audacious business plans on scraps of paper that littered my desk. Like fallen autumn leaves, every late night endured at Westbridge had instilled a crucial lesson: how to lead, how to build, how to inspire. Now I was applying all of it, but on my own terms. Clients arrived slowly at first, then with an almost inevitable momentum. Not because I had stolen them, no, I steadfastly refused to stoop to the cheap tactics Derek would have employed, but because they sought me out. Clearstone's CIO reached out within weeks, informing me they had decided to entrust their analytics project exclusively to Veritas. "We just don't trust the team at Westbridge anymore," she had explained, her voice apologetic yet firm. And that was the fundamental difference: trust, not titles or gleaming logos. Trust, the very foundation Derek had never truly bothered to construct. Halberg swiftly followed suit, citing ongoing system failures that Westbridge simply could not rectify. I had known those systems inside and out, but I had always meticulously documented them with unwavering integrity. I had no need for sabotage. The rot at Westbridge had been festering all along: years of shortcuts, half-finished solutions, and individuals like me propping up their tarnished reputation. Now the truth was catching up, and I was the only one possessing the genuine blueprint to set it right. Veritas didn't just grow, it thrived. I hired Khaled, a senior strategist Derek had once dismissively deemed too green to handle complex projects. I remembered Khaled's incisive mind and unwavering focus, the meticulous way he had taken notes, as if every single word held profound significance. He became my steadfast right hand at Veritas, utterly devoid of ego, pure talent. Naomi, the UX designer who had been mercilessly sidelined for far too long at Westbridge, was next. I had witnessed her transformative ability to elevate dull interfaces into intuitive, user-friendly experiences, a talent no one else there had genuinely appreciated. At Veritas, she was more than just a pair of hands. She was a vibrant creative force who made our projects truly shine. I bestowed upon them titles that carried genuine meaning, roles that perfectly aligned with their exceptional abilities, and the invaluable space to flourish without the constant dread of someone else seizing their well-deserved credit. We built processes that genuinely valued people, weekly stand-ups where every voice, not just the loudest, was heard, reviews that centered on learning and growth, not blame, systems that actually worked because we designed them precisely to fit the client's needs, not Derek's insatiable hunger for a glossy brochure. Every single day felt like palpable progress. Every single day felt like the antithesis of Westbridge. It wasn't solely about accumulating wealth, it was about forging something honest, something truly authentic. 6 months in, we secured our first six-figure retainer. Clearstone signed an exclusive deal with us that garnered prominent headlines in the industry press. The email arrived at midnight, the subject line simply stating, "It's official." I sat in my office, the lights off, the city lights spilling through the blinds, and allowed the magnitude of the moment to fully envelop me. It wasn't mere luck. It wasn't vengeful retribution. It was respect. Respect I had painstakingly earned. respect they had bestowed freely, for they knew with absolute certainty that I would always, always show up for them. I thought of every time Derek had asserted I wasn't ready, every time he had uttered, maybe next quarter, and I smiled because I had built something he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Halberg soon followed, their patience exhausted by Westbridge's incessant delays, by the half-hearted solutions they had been sold. They craved genuine results. They craved veritas. I didn't gloat when the contract arrived. I didn't post a triumphant message online. I had no need to. Because this was no longer about proving Derek wrong. This was about proving myself right. Every time a client signed with us, it was a profound vote of confidence in the way we operated, in the respect we extended, in the tangible value we consistently delivered. I watched my team expand, Naomi bringing in designers who had been criminally underutilized elsewhere, Khalid meticulously mentoring junior strategists with a patience I had always admired. I felt a profound pride, not just in what we had constructed, but in the exceptional people who had chosen to build it alongside me. I remembered the stinging sensation of being overlooked, and I vowed that no one at Veritas would ever experience that profound disquiet. No one would ever question their worth. No one would ever have to wait for next quarter to be acknowledged. We were agile, we were hungry, and we were undeniably accountable. Every late night now felt different, lighter, even joyous. We were forging something honest, and it manifested in the client's enthusiastic responses, in the team's unwavering dedication, and in the way every new contract felt like a small, exhilarating revolution against the old, stagnant way of doing things. I didn't merely aspire for Veritas to succeed. I yearned for it to redefine what success truly looked like, for me, for my team, for every client who had ever been let down by the likes of Derek. Sitting in my office late one night, I reflected on the arduous journey from Westbridge and Halt to this very moment. The arduous lessons, the painful betrayals, the profound silences that had taught me to trust my own unerring instincts. I realized then that I would never again have to solicit permission. I would never again have to wait for someone else to recognize my inherent worth, for I had already built it, brick by painstaking brick, code by meticulous code, relationship by unwavering relationship. And in that transcendent moment, I knew with absolute certainty that Veritas was not merely my company, it was my vindication, my freedom, my future. It was irrefutable proof that the man they had so readily overlooked, the man they had so grossly underestimated, was the very man who had been holding their entire fragile world together. And now, finally, he had forged something they could never touch, something that was unequivocally his. Precisely 1 year to the day after my departure from Westbridge and Halt, I found myself in my new office at Veritas. Real wood paneling graced the walls, soft ambient lighting cast a warm glow, and the faint comforting aroma of good coffee permeated the air. It was late, but the hours no longer mattered. At Veritas, every hour felt like a profound investment, not a weary sacrifice. The gentle hum of the city below filtered through the window, a steady, reassuring reminder of the life I had meticulously built on my own uncompromising terms. That's when the call came. My phone illuminated with Derek's name, the same man who had passed me over 12 times, the man who had so brutally taught me the true price of loyalty in the unforgiving currency of the corporate world. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen, allowing the name to fully sink in. I recalled every dismissive gesture, every one of his smooth CEO-like smiles, every hollow promise of next quarter. I remembered every late night, every system I had salvaged, every client I had prevented from abandoning ship due to his sheer mismanagement. Now he was the one reaching out. I let it ring twice before I answered, calm and utterly composed. Jordan Creed, I stated, my voice steady, the same voice I had employed in hundreds of client meetings. But this time it felt fundamentally different. There was a pause, a fleeting hesitation I had never before discerned from Derek. Then, in a voice that sounded smaller than I had ever heard it, he spoke. Jordan, let's talk merger. His tone attempted confidence but landed somewhere closer to desperate pleading. Veritas and West, imagine what we could do together. I leaned back in my chair, the cool leather a stark contrast against my skin, and allowed the profound silence to stretch. I could almost visualize him in his office, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, eyes rimmed red from countless sleepless nights. I pictured the gaping cracks in his crumbling kingdom, clients fleeing, dashboards failing, junior staff fumbling with processes they had never bothered to learn. And then I pictured the robust empire I had meticulously constructed, the clients who had come to me because I had always delivered, the dedicated team I had assembled who believed implicitly in what we were building. Derek, I began slowly, savoring each syllable. The man you passed over 12 times doesn't exist anymore. I could hear his breath catch, a faint hitch that told me he was still desperately trying to catch up. Jordan, come on, he stammered, his voice cracking in places. We both know Westbridge has the reach, the infrastructure. We've got the legacy. Legacy. That word again. I let out a quiet laugh, not mocking, merely tinged with a profound sadness. Legacy, I explained, is what people say when they're afraid of change, when they're afraid to admit the game has moved on without them. Don't do this, he urged, his tone now urgent. We're stronger together. Think about what we could build. I exhaled slowly. Derek, I responded, I already did. I paused, allowing the crushing weight of my words to settle, and I built it without you. Silence descended on the other end, the kind that speaks volumes. I pictured him staring at his phone, the dawning, horrifying realization that all the power he had once wielded had vanished with my final, defiant walk out the door. I thought of the countless times he had dangled my future like a carrot on a stick, always just beyond my grasp. I thought of the days I had spent waiting for him to see me, to promote me, to treat me as an equal. And I realized in that incandescent moment that I no longer needed him. I never had. Jordan, he began, a last-ditch effort to salvage the moment. Just think about it. We could. I cut him off, my voice firm but utterly calm. No, Derek, I stated. I don't need to merge. I already won. I ended the call, setting the phone down gently on the desk. I gazed out at the city lights, each window a different story, a different possibility. I felt lighter than I had ever felt before. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right, that I was worthy, that I had always been worthy. Because revenge isn't a raging fire, revenge is a quiet, inexorable rising. It's building something better, something honest, something no one can ever take away. It's the profound look in Khaled's eyes when he closed his first major contract and thanked me for believing in him. It's the genuine smile on Naomi's face when she witnessed her designs come to life, unmarred by someone else's name. It's the way my clients called me, not out of desperation, but out of unwavering trust. I looked around my office at the photos of my team at our first grand launch party, No fancy suits, no forced smiles, just authentic people who had chosen to build something that truly mattered. I thought of the laughter, the boundless collaboration, the late nights that felt more like family dinners than forced overtime. I thought of the systems we had built together, the partnerships we had forged, the vibrant culture we had painstakingly created that made people want to show up and perform their absolute best. I reached for the whiteboard and scrawled one word in bold, defiant letters: freedom. Because that is precisely what this was. Not merely financial freedom or career freedom, but freedom from the insidious lies I'd been told, freedom from the stifling people who had tried to box me in, freedom from the man I had been when I had first walked into Derek's office, bright-eyed and eager to please. My phone buzzed again, a text from a client. Client call tomorrow at 10 till we. They want to expand the scope. I smiled. The work never ended, but it no longer felt like a burdensome obligation. It felt like an immense privilege. I turned off the lamp, allowing the comforting darkness to settle, the city lights painting intricate patterns on the ceiling. I thought about that first day I had stepped into Westbridge and Halt, brimming with hope and ambition, and I whispered a quiet thank you to the man I had been, to the harsh lessons I had learned, to the people who had, against all odds, made me stronger. Because the final call was not Derek's, it was mine, and I had answered it. Ladies and gentlemen, since you've listened to the end of this story, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which state you're watching from. Let's see what percentage of elite viewers make it to the end. And please kindly turn your attention to the screen after this message. There you'll find a full playlist of thrilling stories, a subscribe button for the channel, and our most captivating story. Click, enjoy, and thank you.